Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And at the midway point of this 2039 season, our A's are 6 games out in the AL West, but 1 game up on the final wild card spot in the American League. We'd actually host a wild card series if the season were to end today. So after a very mediocre start to the season, the team has been playing better over the last month. We were 28-28 when the month of June began, but a 17-9 record in the month of June has us feeling better about our chances. Still 4 games below Pythagorean expectations. We should be playing almost 600 ball, and a nice combination with the 3rd most runs scored in the American League and the 3rd fewest runs allowed in the American League. So we did our mid-season review in the last episode, talked through the roster and the players who are exceeding expectations, as well as a few areas that we could look to improve. Honestly, I don't think we're going to do a ton this season as we approach the trade deadline, because I think our hope is that players who have been injured for a good chunk of the season will give our lineup the boost that we need. Mike Blumenshine, the rookie pitcher who started the year as our number 4 starter, out for another week with a sprained ankle that's kept him out for 2.5 or so months. Jorge Mendoza suffered a torn ab a couple weeks ago. He's out for another month. And our starting center fielder, Jake Ortega, recovering from a broken hand, and he's going to miss another 5-6 weeks probably by the time he gets through a rehab assignment. But the boost of our starting center fielder, our starting catcher, and a pitcher that we have high expectations for may end up being the key additions that we make over the next month or so until we get to the trade deadline. And we're probably only going to sim ahead 9 games in this episode. We've got 3 at Boston, 3 at Houston, and then we're home for a start of a homestand against San Francisco. And then on the 11th, about a week and a half from now, it's going to be the amateur draft, at which point we will see exactly who may help us 3, 4, 5, 6 years into the future. Coming off of a season when we won the World Series, and we also happened to have one of the better records in all of baseball. Honestly, I think it was, if I remember correctly, I think it was the best record in baseball last year, in addition to winning the World Series. So yeah, we'll be drafting 36th with our first pick, moving into the second round. Why is there already a draft log for 2039? That's odd. There's some quirky stuff happening with this game, as those of you who have followed me know. But we'll be picking 36th with Oakland. And then we've got the 30th and 31st picks in the second round. The second one of those picks is the compensatory pick from the loss of our longtime ace, Jackson Ferris. And this is obviously last year's draft. I guess that must just be a quirk of the game where until you do the new draft, it shows you the 2038, in this case, draft log, because Coy Simmons was the college player that we picked 29th a year ago. I guess I've never just clicked on the draft log before the draft began and assumed that there was not going to be any information there. But we won't be picking until number 36th, so very unlikely that we'll be in the running for any of the true blue chip prospects in the class, unfortunately. But if that's what we have to pay in exchange for winning a World Series title, we'll happily do that every season. So before we sim through the next week and a half and then finish up the episode, figuring out who's on the board for our 36th pick and hopefully getting some thoughts and insight from the worldwide scouting department on which direction we should go. Check in on some of the top prospects that we've drafted in the early rounds and or picked up in trade and or selected and signed as amateur free agents that built our farm system up to being ranked second in the majors at this point. And we've got a boatload of top 100 prospects. I think we've got 10 top 100 prospects at this point. So take a quick look at these players. Some of them you're familiar with because a couple of them are on our major league team right now. But others we haven't checked in on as recently. Juan Pimentel, of course, signed him to a long-term deal before he ever played for us in the majors, and he is off to a rousing start, hitting .364 and 107 at-bats. I think he may become our third baseman for hopefully the next decade or so. Catcher Jonah Richards is not too far away, the number 12 prospect in baseball, and we got lucky with him. We picked him up in a trade with the Dodgers a few years ago at this point. That was when we dealt away Amari Raphael, who was once one of the top pitching prospects in our organization. Looks like he's retired now. And Wilson Pedraza, not a big-time prospect. So we're definitely happy to get Richards in return. And he's a guy who, when we picked him up in that trade, we thought, he was kind of a meh prospect. Looked like he could be a major league average type bat with a below average glove. Certainly was more of a throw-in guy than anything else. And he has, at this point, become a big-time prospect. You can see his potential contact, power, eye, and his defense are all materially higher than they were back when we were looking at him 3 or so years ago when we picked him up in a trade. Richards recently promoted from high A to double A, and he's hitting a ridiculous .533 in his first 30 at-bats in double A ball. He will be up in triple A in the not too distant future, and certainly is a guy who's going to be looking to push Mendoza and Ogata for a spot on the major league roster a year from now. We'll probably end up doing a little bit of service time manipulation with him early next year, assuming that both Mendoza and Ogata are still healthy. It's 6'2". Richards has a little bit of experience playing third base, but he's not particularly effective there. Probably will cross-train him a bit so he could play first base for us as well. Really like his glove as a catcher. But with Mendoza likely going to be behind the plate for us for another couple years before he'll likely get too expensive, may need to get a little more creative with where Richards plays in the lineup to get him an appropriate amount of playing time. Darnell Selvey, the left fielder, hitting .258 with 8 homers and 31 ribbies and 194 at-bats. Number 39 prospect in baseball, has gotten to play because of the injury to Jake Ortega. Shortstop Jorge Castillo, number 65 prospect in baseball, hitting just a .198 in 207 at-bats in high A ball. Like his glove, like some of the personality traits, and still think his bat could develop and be a more than respectable bat for a player who is as good and versatile defensively as he is. But definitely have not been seeing that in the results in the minors yet for the 22-year-old. Shortstop David Palomares, our international free agent signing from 2037. He was our big target that year, number 69 prospect in baseball, making his debut as a 19-year-old in the DSL, and he is raking, hitting .364 in his first 77 at-bats. Not inconceivable that we will bump him up to A-ball before the end of the season as a teenager. Federico Arreola, former second-round pick from 2034, the number 75 prospect in baseball, 4-7 with a 5.97 ERA in Double-A. So he certainly has not been that productive in terms of the traditional metrics. Allowing 15 home runs and 101 at-bats is not great. That being said, his SIERA is almost 3 runs better than his ERA. He's put up a WAR of 3. Strikeout to walk ratio of 4-3 is certainly solid. And think that Mr. Arriola is a potential September call-up and a guy who certainly could be competing for a spot in the rotation down the line. Those of you who know that we like to try to get young players signed to extensions at a reasonable price, if at all possible. I have looked at that with Mr. Arriola, and unfortunately he seems to know his value, so he's following the Doug Weiss pattern of young pitchers in our organization rather than the Mike Blumenshine pattern and being a little more willing to sign a contract that we would be amenable to. Jesus Ramos, another starting pitcher, 8th round pick from 2036. The 21-year-old is 5-2 with a 2.45 ERA and almost 13 strikeouts per 9 innings in high A ball this year. Certainly would be thinking about promoting him in the not too distant future. This is a high school pitcher that we picked in the 8th round, and as you can see, his upside has become significantly more than we thought it was going to be in the past. Jacoby Manelli, our international free agent signing from a year ago in 2038. The 18-year-old just recently turned 18, listed as the number 81 prospect in baseball. Doesn't look like he's quite ready to really give a respectable showing at the DSL, so we're going to take it slow with him, similar to what we've done with Palomares, and not have him playing in the DSL until he's 19 years old. Luis Godina looks like he's going to be a very versatile defensive player for us and a right-handed bat that we think could be helping us in the infield or at the very least as a very useful utility man not too far down the line. Hitting .278 with 18 homers and 56 ribbies in AAA, 112 WRC plus for the former international free agent signing. And our final top 100 prospect, and we'll give you a bonus with Coy Simmons before we get into him. Coy Simmons, last year's first-round pick. We talked about him because he still showed up. We just promoted him to A-ball. He had really struggled in rookie ball the first time around. Much more successful in the first couple weeks of the season at the rookie league this year. And we have now promoted him up to A-ball. Given that he's a 22-year-old college player, the hope is that we'll be able to continue moving him up through the organization relatively quickly. And did start talking before I saw Simmons there about Ernesto Comunez. Some questions about him in the messages and the chat following the final episode. He has bounced back from his injury reasonably well. 5-1 with a 3.54 ERA in his introduction to AAA this year as a 21-year-old. Probably not going to push him incredibly quickly to get to the majors, but similar to what I was talking about with Federico Arriola, although these guys are 22 and 21 years old, feel like we've got another 2 potentially big-time arms for the rotation waiting for us in AAA. So I don't know if I define it as an embarrassment of riches in the minor leagues right now, but we certainly have a lot of good players who are in the majors or close to the majors, and also some younger guys in the lower levels of the organization that we think could be helping us 2, 3, 4 years away. So the cupboard here on July 1st in the Oakland A's minor league system is certainly not bare. And the good news is that we snapped our 3-game losing streak with a win in Boston against the Red Sox. Bad news, our backup catcher that we traded for not too long ago when Mendoza went on to the IL. Our former starter, Jaden Boakai, out with a back strain for about 2 weeks. And as we talked about when we brought Boakai on board, before we brought him on board, we only had 2 catchers on the 40-man roster. Now we have only 3 catchers on the 40-man roster, so we are going to need to make a move on the secondary roster to open up some space to bring up someone to back up Ogata for the next couple of weeks. And we ended up transferring the oft-injured Juan Campos, who's out again with a strained forearm that he suffered a couple weeks ago, for another 5 weeks to the 60-day IL to get him off of the 40-man. 2-1 with a 5.75 ERA in AAA for us. The former 4th-round draft pick 9 years ago at this point has had a once promising looking career derailed pretty hard by injuries. We'll likely end up meeting that he'll spend an extra week or 2 on the IL compared to when he's healthy, but that meant being able to transfer him to the 60-day IL that we were not going to need to actually waive and DFA a player. Gave us the opportunity to promote the veteran Jefferson Caro, who's been in our minor league system this year, to the majors. Still a solid defensive catcher, not really much of a bat, does have a positive influence in the clubhouse. So the 4-time All-Star who won a championship in 2034 will get back into the majors as Hidetaka Ogata's backup, at least over the next few weeks. And we ended up sweeping our series in Fenway, 10-4, 5-2, and 8-5 victories. So 3 games left at Houston, and then back at home against the Giants this coming week before we focus on the draft. And we've won 3 out of 5 this week. Took the series in Houston 2 out of 3, split the first 2 at home against the Giants. So the hope is certainly that we'll win the final game here today to take a 3rd consecutive series and head into the draft with a 7-2 record for the month of July. Feeling good about how things are going. Good news on the injury front. Blumenshine is finally recovered from his injury, given that it's been a while, I think about 2.5, close to 3 months since he suffered an injury. Only pitched the first 5 games for us this year, so it was, I believe, late April when he went down. So I guess he's been out about 2.5 months. Going to give him some time to do at least 1 rehab start, maybe 2 in AAA before bringing him back up. And we did end up winning the game against San Francisco, so after an outstanding month of June, we're off to a good start here in the month of July. 3.5 games behind in the division, behind the Rangers at this point, and 4 games up on the final wild card spot. So we've been playing our best baseball of the year over the last month and a half or so. Alejandro Landin has pushed himself up to 3rd in the American League in home runs at this point. And he is the only one of our Oakland A's who is right near the top of the key leaderboards in the AL in this 2039 season. As I mentioned, we're now at the first-year player draft, and we're not going to be picking until pick number 36. So as I noted, the highest-end prospects are almost certainly going to be off the board by the time we get to our pick. Take a look at least at the mock draft and a few of the guys that we likely won't be able to pick. Amari Ingleton, shortstop, is expected to go first overall. Looks like a good, solid defensive player with a potentially very interesting bat. Center fielder Mike Gunther out of New Mexico State looks like a potential monster bat in center field if he reaches his full potential. Does have a low work ethic and looking for a lot of money. Even so, certainly no chance he'll be available when we're on the board. Shortstop Jonathan Foster, good-looking player out of Bowling Green. Looks like a pretty solid bat with a pretty solid glove if someone's looking for someone a little closer to the major leagues. Kevin Hutchings, another shortstop. Looks like really interesting home run power for the 18-year-old out of California. Also looks like he could have a pretty interesting glove and some positive personality traits. And center fielder Eric Rabbitfoot Svaldson out of Illinois. Looks like a pretty interesting center field prospect. Good speed, real good instincts on the base paths, some really positive personality traits, pretty solid outfield range, and a bat that looks like it could be above average in everything except home run power. So some interesting players at the top of the draft this year. Again, not expecting that any of them will be available when we get to pick number 36. And the pitching pool this year was not particularly deep, and you can see there's only 3 players left with more than 3-star potential according to our scout here at the end of the first round. Juan Ramos, a familiar name for players that we've had over the years, committed to LSU, starting pitcher who looks like he could have a pretty versatile repertoire of pitches. Barely touches 90 on the radar gun. Almost 19 years old. Don't think his stuff is going to be anything special, although we do think his movement and his control could be above average. Good personality with that high adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence. Good enough stamina, not particularly good at holding on runners. Joey Gaskins, another starting pitcher prospect, kind of similar. Some good personality traits, a broad repertoire of pitches, but none that are particularly impressive. Think he could have really good control. The lefty does throw a bit harder than Ramos. And at least according to our scout, Ben Skaggs has the highest ceiling. Young pitcher out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Think he could have an outstanding cutter to go with a good fastball, changeup, and sinker. Stuff and control could both be well above average. Movement on his pitches pretty average. Throws in the low 90s. Is already fragile in terms of his injury proneness at 18 years old. And he's also going to be very expensive to potentially sign. So don't know that we'll be chasing after any of those pitchers, but we'll give it some thought and we'll investigate some of the other names offline. And the pool of potential hitters is a little bit deeper. We'll take a look at the 5 4.5-star potential players, at least according to our scout. Third baseman Chad Allred, almost 19 years old, Menifee, California product. Looks like a pretty interesting bat. Should be able to hit some home runs. Not particularly great defensively, but if he reaches his full potential, certainly is a guy that you could play at first base if you needed to. DeAnthony Bramblett, a second baseman out of Mississippi. Pretty good contact hitter with decent power, good speed, an outstanding bunter. Don't love him defensively. Would definitely need that to get better before potentially thinking about bringing him on board. Not really much of an outfielder either. That arm, even in left field, is probably not going to play incredibly well. Second baseman Steve Colgan, 18-year-old out of Abington, Massachusetts. Another guy who looks very rough defensively, but a pretty well-balanced bat that we think could be above average in everything if he reaches his full potential. Jimmy Hilton, 17-year-old first baseman, decent potential home run hitter, not much in terms of his speed and his defense, and he's got a lot of work to do to be able to make consistent contact with the ball, particularly against major leaguers. Kevin Stanaway, a second baseman, has potentially world-class home run power. The rest of his offensive profile is pretty meh. Decent speed. Not great defensively, but that's what the development lab is for. Since I'm not necessarily in love with any of those top 5 prospects, we'll also take a quick look at the 4-star prospects. There's only 6 more of them around, so maybe someone there will be more to my fancy or perhaps more intriguing to the worldwide scouting department. Or if not, maybe one of the guys we've looked at or maybe one of the pitchers will be the direction we end up going. Center fielder Jeremy Wright, pretty interesting profile actually for the 18-year-old. Outstanding gap power coupled with really good speed. We think his contact and his home run power could both be above average. Pretty solid defensively. He's looking to get paid, and we don't think he's going to draw a ton of walks. But I don't hate his profile compared to some of the other guys we've looked at. Second baseman John West, a very well-balanced batting profile. Durable, another guy who's not impressive defensively, not very fast, doesn't really look like an outfielder either. Clay Salzman, a left fielder out of Canada, another player who's durable, pretty average defensive player, does look like he could hit some home runs and draw some walks if he fully develops. Center fielder Mitch Ponder, outstanding gap power and borderline outstanding home run power if he reaches his full potential. High leadership, loyalty, and intelligence, albeit low adaptability. Looks like a decent outfield prospect defensively. Don't know that I'd play him in center field unless I had to. Dave Moser, another center fielder. Contact and eye, both outstanding. We think his gap power could be above average. Not a ton of home run power, but a pretty interesting left-handed hitting profile. Average defensively, average speed. And last but not least, Nate Crone, first baseman, a little older, 19 years old, out of Provo, Utah. Poor defensively, not a ton of speed, not a good bunter, but pretty solid contact and pretty good home run power. Take a quick look at what our scouting director recommends. He recommends Jeremy Wright, the center fielder. I did think he had one of the more intriguing profiles out there. The name sounds slightly familiar, but I don't think he could have been one of the top guys in the mock draft, was he? No, he wasn't. Making myself wish that he was. Doesn't look like he's been expected to go thus far. We are projected to go with Jimmy Hilton, first baseman. So the scout suggests, or the mock draft suggests the 17-year-old first baseman Hilton, pretty solid potential bat. Our scout suggests the center fielder Jeremy Wright, another guy with a pretty solid bat, pretty solid glove. And that contact and gap power combination with the very good speed has the recipe to generate a lot of extra base hits, so that is interesting. If we were to do a pitcher, Joey Gaskins, not surprisingly, is one of the answers. Figured it would be one of the top 3 guys that we mentioned earlier. I don't think there is a obvious pound-the-table guy, but this has been a very initial and cursory review. I'll certainly be spending more time with all of these player profiles offline, and I know that some of you will very graciously be pausing your videos and looking in depth at some of these profiles and giving me some thoughts on where you think we should go with the 36th pick in the draft. might as well also just look at the mock draft a little bit and see who were expected to be taken with those last couple picks. We mentioned DeAnthony Bramblett already. The second baseman would be great value if we were able to give him at the end of the second round. Juan Granda, a first baseman out of Honolulu, Hawaii, is our projected pick in our first of those final two picks in the second round. And with that, we'll call it an episode. As we've talked about, the A's have been playing their best baseball of the year recently. The youngster Juan Pimentel continues to absolutely rake. 357 average in his first 143 at-bats, 15 homers, 15 doubles, 4 homers, and 27 ribbies for Pimentel, putting up a ridiculous 161 WRC+. Not shockingly, when we did send Amare Alcindor, who had been struggling this year, down to AAA and brought up Mr. Pimentel over a month ago, that's when this offense really started hitting on all cylinders. And you can see we don't have a completely dominant team, but we do have some guys who are hitting some home runs this year, which is always good. And all 4 of our top 4 starters at this point have 7 or 8 wins. Baumler, the rookie, started as the number 5 starter, but got promoted given that injury to Blumenshine, who we should have back soon. And Baumler's already won a Rookie of the Month award, and with an 8-3 record and over 100 strikeouts, would think that he could be getting some Rookie of the Year attention by the time we get to the end of this season and through the postseason and into the off season. But a lot of work to do before we get to that point. We've got the draft coming up next, and then we're going to try to guide this team back into the playoffs, and hopefully when all is done, win a 3rd championship in the past 4 seasons and go back-to-back for the first time when we get to the end of October. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.